To be honest, I'm not sure how the closing scene of my marriage played out right now. Candace returned home from the conference. I was at 30,000 feet in the air. I'd like to envision her walking through the door and shouting, "I'm home!" Then she told me how much she missed me and how happy she was to be home. She undoubtedly expected me to be waiting for her with dinner on the table, as usual. I'd like to assume she frowned when she entered the kitchen and saw a full-color printout of how she had been entertained less than 48 hours before by my employer, her boss, and one of my close friends. If I'm being picky, my lawyer was probably irritated to find divorce papers, a copy of the prenup, and a 30-day eviction notice behind the printout. I'd want to believe she was upset and inconsolable, but I honestly don't know. But a little more than a month ago, I had no idea my wife was a cheating whore. And my employer, her employer, and even my friends were sharing my wife's joys, which were supposed to be mine and mine alone according to our wedding vows. My name is Thomas Other. I'm 27 years old, and when I turned 32, I became the sole heir to my grandparents' $70 million trust. It was the cause of my current situation. Up to that moment, I had reached adulthood. I was paid $8,000 per month, which was part of the foundation's monthly interest income. I also had rental income from many investment properties across the country, as well as my own luxury penthouse apartment, which was debt-free. But I wasn't a lazy trust fund baby throughout the day. I worked as an accountant at Salmon & Zach's, a high-end accounting business in Melbourne, Australia. You might imagine that I grew up in a good family, and you would be correct. However, my parents always encouraged me not to look down on individuals who did not have the same level of education as us. I was an only child who lost both my parents and grandparents simultaneously. They were in a private plane that crashed over Europe while on vacation when I was 21 years old. I should have gone on that trip, but I had university exams, so I became the lone surviving heir to the family fortune that I was entitled to. A large fortune was no secret, but I never flaunted it. When I graduated, my parents purchased me a gorgeous penthouse apartment near the university that was only a short walk from Simon & Sachs. So I lived comfortably for a few years and never complained to my treacherous whore wife. I met Candace one night while walking around town with my friends. Candace was with a group of girlfriends doing the same thing. We danced. I bought a few beers, and she returned to my flat and climbed into bed with me. When, following a drunken binge, we realized we liked each other. Candace, ironically, was supporting one of her friends that night after discovering her partner was cheating on her. Candace and I dated for a few months before deciding to become exclusive. It was a foregone conclusion. I genuinely feel that Candace was unconcerned about my financial situation back then. Until lately, I had always seen her as balanced. Candace worked for one of the town's leading marketing firms and earned a fair living. Looking back, I felt we had a great marriage. As a young and well-off couple, we rarely ate at home. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we both worked out at the gym, and on Saturdays, we partied in the city, eating gourmet meals, dancing at clubs, or laughing loudly at one of the local comedy clubs. I trembled as I remembered asking her to marry me. Of course, she agreed. At the time, I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. Candace is looking for something that most men would consider average. We had been married for 2 years and were discussing starting a family when, in retrospect, everything began to fall apart. Candace had to leave every several months for business, a conference, or other obligations. I didn't think much about it at first. After all, we have no reason to question people we love, do we? While my wife was abroad, I would often ease my stress by viewing one of our home movies. But I never considered the shit show that awaiting me until it happened. George Seaman, my manager and partner at the firm where I worked, had just announced that he needed to leave for a 3-week business trip. This happened from time to time, but the 3-week span piqued my interest. Candace also informed me this morning that she was planning to attend a 3-week conference next week. Of course, as the dumb husband that I am, I assumed it was more out of curiosity than anything else. But it was one of our interns, Iona, a 22-year-old blonde stunner from Germany, got me up to speed. "Hello, Thomas," Iona stated when she entered my office following George's declaration. "Have you got a minute?" "Sure, Iona. Give me a second," I informed her, saving a spreadsheet I was working on for one of our corporate clients. I turned to face her and observed her for a moment. Iona Brown was tiny in stature, but extremely attractive. She had long golden hair that to her waist, large expressive blue eyes, and the features of a princess. She usually dressed conservatively but professionally, indicating that she was serious about her work. She would finish her work with us the following week and move north, where she would tour Australia for a year before returning to Germany for another year to visit relatives. During her 3 months with us, I shared a couple cups of coffee with her. She struck me as unfailingly honest, never allowing anyone to do wrong. One of the younger accountants was under pressure to complete a task and attempted to cut corners. Even though Iona was just a trainee, she revealed everything, and the accountant had to eat crow for a month. So when I looked at Iona and saw the gloomy expression on her gorgeous face, I groaned, knowing the topic would be depressing. "What is wrong, Iona? You seem serious. Is everything okay?" I asked. She paused for a second. She looked over her shoulder at everyone who was leaving the workplace. She scowled and glanced at me again. "Thomas," Iona stated seriously, "I need to talk to you about something, but not here. Will you take me for lunch today?" I was curious about what it might be, not an issue. "Do you think DIY is good?" I inquired, alluding to the widely renowned DIY sandwich shop. "For a few dollars, you could prepare any type of sandwich, wrap, or salad." She nodded. "Yes, but please. The one on George on the opposite side of William Street." I was fascinated, but I didn't consider going that far from the office until we were seated at the food table, and she stretched for my hand. I raised an eyebrow at her. I never imagined Iona would hit on me, and she knew I would never cheat on Candace. When Iona noticed my raised brow, she swiftly removed her hand, blushing. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she replied with a beautiful, high-pitched tone. She had a mild German accent. "I just know what I have to say will be difficult for you to hear. I was not thinking. I apologize." I felt my stomach clenching. I had no idea what this was about, but I quickly knew that I was going to get in trouble. I'd only met someone with Jonas's looks once in my life. It was before my grandparents and folks had returned from their trip abroad. I swallowed. "It's okay, Jonah," I said with mock assurance. I forgot about my lunch on the table in front of me. "But I have to say I am concerned about you. What is the matter?" Over the following 20 minutes, Iona told me that she overheard George Simon talking to someone last week about how excited he was to entertain everyone in 2 weeks. Iona blushed as she informed me that he had accepted to meet with a group called Everyone for Coffee. She then surprised me by informing me that she had silently followed him about, photographing George and the other men hugging and kissing the mystery woman while turning the phone around with a painful expression on her face. Iona showed me the photograph, which turned out to be of my wife, Candace. I almost lost my unfinished lunch. Iona spent the next few minutes telling me how sorry she was. The only reason she recognized the woman was because of a photo on my desk of Candace and I hugging on our wedding day. To say I was devastated would be an understatement. I must have sat there nearly unconscious for several minutes until Iona reached out and stroked my arm again. "Thomas," she asked quietly, "can you hear me?" I snorted. "Yeah, sorry, Iona. Thank you for not asking whether I'm okay, but I'm not," I replied, groaned, and wiggled my shoulders expressively. "I suppose I should contact a lawyer." Iona frowned. "I would not," she said. I gazed at her. "Why not? A lawyer is always required throughout a divorce. Why not start with one?" Iona fiddled with her phone for a minute before turning it around and showing me another photo of the all-girl band. "Because next week, your lawyer will accompany Mr. Simon and your wife. I overheard. There are 5 of them." "I apologize, Thomas," I groaned, leaning back in my chair. My chest felt tight. A sense of panic was rising in my chest, which I fought to conceal. I looked at Jonah. "Why?" I asked the question while knowing she would be unable to answer it. She stated, "From what I understand, it is because of the money." "Money?" I asked gently. "Yes," she responded. "I'm not sure how to tell you about these awful facts. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but they mentioned that the money should stay where it belongs and that this is their method of doing so. You know, there are times when a light bulb goes off where you think, what the heck? Okay, I had both at the same time. Iona, I need to throw up." I spoke suddenly. She nodded. "I understand." I shake my head. My jaw is now fixed in determination, despite the raging war of emotions taking place beneath the surface. No. I mean, I should make myself vomit and send you back to the office to inform everyone that I am not feeling well. Make sure Mary phones Candace and informs her that I'm unwell. Tell her I'm on my way to the doctor and we'll figure things out after the appointment. Mary was our office manager and assistant bookkeeper. I stood up abruptly. Iona and I stood up together. Iona, I cannot thank you enough for everything you did, I explained, giving her an odd smile. If you hadn't told me, I could have found myself in a scenario that I believe is unwinnable. Can you tell Mary the story? Will you be able to keep it between ourselves without any hesitation? Iona nodded and swore quietly in German. Of course. I apologize, Thomas. I hope you do not bear a grudge against me. I smiled and extended my hand. No, exactly the reverse. I'm quite grateful to you. If you need a favor in the future, please call me. Today, you gained a lifelong buddy. She grinned back. We shook hands and parted ways. I went into the public restroom and tickled my tonsils, causing myself to puke. If I was going to take action, I needed to do so realistically. I called my doctor but hung up just as I was being detained. I didn't know who was involved in this affair. I called another doctor and scheduled my next visit. I took an Uber to the doctor and was seen barely 5 minutes after my appointment time. The doctor, an Indian woman in her 40s, examined me, informed me I most likely had a stomach issue, prescribed some mild antibiotics, and gave me a prescription and a 3-day sick leave as I exited the operation room. I decided I had to do something about it. I drove my car to a modest hotel on the outskirts of town, where I had always wanted to stay. It was a 15-minute walk from my house, so I'd never used it. But today, it would be ideal for my needs. I entered through the door and checked in a few minutes after lying down on my room's bed. The telephone rang. It was Candace. "Are you all right, babe?" she inquired with anxiety in her voice. "Mary called to say you were not feeling well." "Yeah, I'm okay," I said, faking it as I always did when I was sick. I had just left the doctor, who had told me that I most likely had a gastrointestinal disease. I've been in one spot for a few days, so I won't pass it along to you before you depart for the conference. On the phone, I noticed her frown and pause briefly. "I understand. Is there anything I could bring you?" I was startled, for the woman who had slept with my boss. She was also concerned about who else was involved. I thought about it for a bit. Yeah. "Could you please bring me a few sets of clothing and toiletries? If I'm stuck here for a few days, I might as well get comfy. You can take them to reception, and they will leave them at my doorstep." I told them I wasn't feeling well, and they promised to bring me chicken soup for supper. Candace cooed. "I wish I had not departed so that I could keep an eye on you." I coughed. "It's fine, Candace. I'll feel better in a few days." We talked for a few more minutes, and I would never have suspected anything was wrong if Iona hadn't showed me a picture of Candace and George hugging as we hung up. I wondered if there wasn't another reason. I had my laptop in my bag, so I pulled it out, connected to the guest house's Wi-Fi, and began searching for private investigators. I contacted 3 different agencies before finding someone ready to meet with me in the morning. I also contacted a new law firm, Bradman, Torrance, and Clark. I knew they were my attorney's biggest competition, so I booked a 2-hour late meeting with the investigator. That night, I tossed and turned, fell asleep for half an hour, and then awoke to tossing and turning again. I was sleeping off again when Candace called to see how I was doing and whether I had received my clothes. Her voice was filled with concern, and I wondered whether she had truly abandoned me. Iona would not lie. The images she showed me certainly did not, but I wondered if she had a doppelganger who George Simon was sleeping with. I informed the BND's main desk this morning that I was going and would return later today. I informed them that I was on my way to a doctor's appointment in case my wife called, and arranged for a car to transport 2 discreet investigators across town. There is a private investigation firm within. I did not have to wait long, as a very modest man emerged and led me into a quiet office. He astonished me by checking for electronic bugs and ensuring that no one was listening in. He made me share my story. The guy, as he called me, nodded when I told him what Iona had told me. I showed him the photographs and asked what I wanted. "Mr. Other, we can provide a variety of services, but could you please tell me what you need?" asked Norm. I briefly considered having my wife and boss monitored. Photos, videos, and whatever else you see fit. If something is going on, I want to know what it is before I take action. I paused. Norm spotted it right away. He asked, lifting his brow. Looking at the person, I decided to reassure myself. Look, I'm not sure what's going on, but my source claims money is mentioned between my wife and my boss. In a few years, I'll inherit a substantial trust money, and I can't help but wonder whether this has something to do with it. I need to know if I can trust you if you know there's a lot of money involved. Norm returned my gaze briefly before smiling. Give me a minute, Mr. Other. He left and returned a few minutes later with a pile of paperwork. I believe we can assist you acquire anything you want. Mr. Other, please find attached our confidentiality and financial papers. Our prices and legal terms are outlined below. I scanned the documents and noticed that they were utilizing the same lawyers that I was due to see. I signed the documents and we shook hands. Norm informed me that he would have individuals for Candace and George before the end of the day. I informed him that I would cover all expenditures, including travel if required, and proceeded to my next meeting with the potential new attorneys. Randwick Johnston had been our family's attorney for some years. His grandfather worked with my grandparents and parents to establish the trust. When his grandfather retired, Randwick, or Randy as we knew him, took his position. I've never questioned his integrity in the years since my family died. I recognized that handling my finances was a feather in his cap. In reality, I had made multiple suggestions to him over the years, and as a result, he had a small practice with several people from the firm. However, after yesterday's disclosures, I refused to wait for the mountain to fall on me. I was going to start the avalanche myself and hope not to get caught up in its devastation. That's why Damian Torrance of Bradman, Torrance & Clark welcomed me into his office within 2 minutes of arriving. Damian has been attempting to get my business for years. Randy needed an extra set of hands to assist with an investment I wanted to make a few years back, and Damian expressed interest, even offering to bring Randy in as a partner once he learned the specifics. So, Mr. Other, what is the reason for this unexpected visit and Mr. Johnston's absence? Damian inquired with the perplexed expression that only lawyers acquire. I have grounds to think that my wife, boss, and lawyer are plotting against me, and I must protect myself. I responded with a tinge of concern in my voice. Lawyers are frequently depicted as cold and unfeeling jerks who rack up massive bills and don't care about the clients they serve. Damian Torrance was the embodiment of this culture. He donned an expensive three-piece suit and sat in a fancy office designed to instill terror. Damian straightened up and turned to face the stunning panorama of Melbourne behind him. I heard him exhale, and I spent the next 20 minutes telling my experience building up to this incident. Do you appreciate a challenge, Mr. Other? He said, turning to me with a harsh grin on his face. Look, he replied, spreading his hands. If you agree to transfer your business to our firm, regardless of the outcome of the dispute with Mr. Johnston, I will give you a 25% discount on our services for the next 3 years. And I even worked one of my billable hours for free to seal the deal. I looked at Damian for a minute, examining him. Why? I asked. Thomas. Could I call you Thomas? I nodded. He nodded again and sat down. Keeping your account is very important to us. It is not only the quantity of money in your trust, it also generates revenue. You handle your money properly and make sound investments. And I'm confident that if I acquire your business, we'll have some more major clients come in. If I give you an incentive to switch to us now while you're in trouble, you'll stop running about shopping and we'll both gain in the long term. I laughed. This guy was a great white shark and he knew how to sell it. We spent the next hour finalizing the details before he ordered his assistant to take me to another room where I signed the contract to end my life in triplicate. Admittedly, they prepared excellent coffee and provided me with free lunch. As I finished filling out the forms, Damian smiled at me. Thomas, I just wanted to let you know that Norm from Discreet Investigation phoned us, and I told him that you should call him back to confirm that we are now representing you. I thought you might want Norm to follow up with Mr. Johnston as well. I considered for a bit before nodding. A good idea. And Thomas? He spoke with a serious expression on his face, but it appeared far less professional. Yes. Would you mind having brunch on Sunday morning? I mean, you don't want to do much in your normal circle till it's finished. I thought about it for a moment and agreed. I spent the remainder of the day at Nook Liska, sorting through our bills. There was nothing unique about any of them, but I wasn't the same naive person I was 24 hours before. I set up a few of notifications in case something occurred to the amount beyond $1,000 every day. That night, George sent me an email wishing me a speedy recovery and expressing his hope that I would return to work on Monday. Candace called and told me how much she missed me. I realized that if none of this were true, I would have a lot to make up for. But what puzzled me was that Candace had never mentioned canceling the trip and staying to watch over me. I received a call from Norman. He confirmed that he had followed up with all 3 targets, and the only thing left to do was wait. In his experience, if a deceiver had a strategy in the works, he rarely changed it unless absolutely essential. Otherwise, it was more difficult to maintain the falsehood. As a result, he didn't wait until they went for the conference to find out if they were going to meet. I finally received a text from Jonah inquiring how I was doing. I responded that I was doing okay, but I was hesitant to confirm what was actually going on. By Saturday afternoon, my worst worries had been fulfilled. The conference, if you can call it that, was held at a hotel a few hours away from Melbourne. The 5 of them had hired a room and didn't even bother to draw the curtains before starting their debauched orgy. Norms. 3 detectives shared their stories and each chose their own spot to observe what was going on. Candace was entertained within an hour. Sunday morning, just a few days after their so-called conference began, I awoke and checked out of my hotel. I wasn't feeling well based on what I'd heard thus far, but I needed to go home to change before heading over to Damien's for brunch as we had planned. As I entered my apartment, I looked about with dismay. Everywhere I looked, I saw where Candace and I had made love, but now I could see each of her other partners amusing her in their own seats. When they came to see us, I vomited again, this time in the bathroom, before immediately showering and changing. I knew I would never stay there again. Candace had soiled my home, whether she was entertaining them here or not. An hour later, an Uber driver dropped me off at Damien's penthouse in central Melbourne. It was a lovely place, and I met his wife, Mel, and their daughter, Colleen. For the next hour, the 3 of them kept me entertained. Colleen astonished me with her intelligence and modesty, something I did not expect from the daughter of a shark. After a delicious brunch of potato hash browns with bacon and spinach, we sipped another fantastic coffee. Colleen bowed out, leaving Damien, Mel, and me to talk. I looked across at Damien, who was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt and was the complete opposite of the take-no-prisoners lawyer I had met a few days ago. He observed this and laughed when I told him what I believed. Thomas. "It's okay," he said, repeating one of my favorite expressions at work. "I have to be that type of person. I mean, my name hangs on the door. However, after hearing your story, my invitation was a genuine gesture of prospective friendship. I feel you are a kind person who has had many individuals fall on you from tremendous heights. When I told Mel what was going on, she virtually insisted on you coming." The 2 exchanged short glances, and Mel nodded. "Mel has been where you are today." I stared at the lovely raven-haired woman again. She nodded and placed her hand on her husband's arm. Damien gently placed his palm over hers, encouraging her to speak. "Thomas, I understand what you're going through," Mel said. "Something similar occurred to me a few years ago. My first husband, Lawrence, cheated on me with 2 other individuals," she remarked, flushing. Damien squeezed her hand. She exhaled. "I hope everything is fine," she inquired, staring at me. But Damien only mentioned a fraction of what you're going through. He claimed the reports were graphic. I nodded. "Okay, I understand it. I discovered my first husband, Lawrence, in our bed with 2 other men." "I said," I repeated, wiggling my nose. She nodded. "I'm so sorry," I said. Machine muttered mentally, reverting to pictures of my wife and 4 other men. I shivered again. "It was soul-destroying at the time, and I was going insane," she informed me, little bewildered by past memories in a wrath. "I must have wrecked half the home and then kicked all 3 of them out while shouting furiously. I ended up getting a divorce through Damien's legal practice, and the matter was handled by one of Damien's alumni." "Is this how you 2 met?" I asked. Both shook their heads. Damien grinned while staring at his wife. He explained that my story was a little different. I was engaged, but Cherry, my fiancée, couldn't bear the long and obscure hours I worked as a partner in a law firm. So we split up. Not the worst, but still a breakup. Mel and I met at a coffee shop downstairs about a month before her divorce was finalized. I was drawn to her face and expectant belly. "What do you mean?" I inquired, glancing at Mel, who reddened. They both nodded to me. "Yes. Is Colleen Lawrence's daughter?" Mel explained. "I discovered out several weeks after everything had transpired." Damien stated that nothing had changed for him. I did not hesitate to adopt Colleen when she turned 2, and Mel and I married. Lawrence joyfully signed the adoption paperwork because it meant he wouldn't have to pay child support. We sat for a time, letting me process what had been spoken. I looked at them again while sipping my coffee. "So what happened with Lawrence?" I asked. Damien snorted. "Over the next year, he became gravely ill with many STDs. We haven't checked in on him in a while, but the last we heard, he was living in a shared house and working in customer service for a major telecoms firm. He then exhaled. But if it makes him happy, that's great. However, he should have been honest with Mel." Mel clasped his hand again and gave him a kind gaze. "Yes, but it brought us together. I can't complain about that even if it caused me some pain," Mel said. "There's that," Damien replied almost guardedly. We talked some more, and Colleen returned to spend more time with us before heading back inside to call her Discord pals. "How about you, Thomas?" Mel inquired after handing each of us new coffee. Mel, I discovered, made fantastic coffee. She had attended a barista course a few years before and knew exactly how to make a cappuccino. I looked at Damien and raised an eyebrow. He smiled and waved his hand dismissively. "You're not on the clock," he said, smiling. "It's simply new pals expressing worry for someone they wish to assist." I grinned, which seemed like the first real smile I'd had since everything had happened. Honestly, I peered into my coffee as if it were tea leaves that could guide me in the future. "I do not. I believe Damien told you that I would inherit a lot of money in a few years." Mel shook her head, smiling. "No, he just told me you were in a difficult situation and that your wife had cheated on you with a few others." I looked at Damien, who had a smile on his face. "Please let me know if I should tell my tale." "Well," I explained, taking a long breath, "Candace and I have been married for several years. We discussed starting a family soon. But then, one of the interns at work informed me that my wife was cheating on me. It turned out it was with my employer, her boss, and my previous lawyer." Damien smiled along with a buddy of mine. Candace has been attending these conferences for a few years now, so I can only assume it has been going on for as long. Based on claims, videos, and images, that appears to resemble your ex-husband. I blushed somewhat at that admission, so I guess the first thing I need to do is organize the house. They all need to go for a moment. Damien's expression resembled that of a white hound checking out its prey. When he realized I had captured that face, he reddened again. I halted. "It's okay, Damien. You can enjoy the challenge," I told him. He laughed. I groaned again, diverting my focus from my coffee to the couple in front of me, then to the balcony for a view of Melbourne. The city was quiet over the weekend, and I felt tranquil. I believe the first thing I should do is request a thorough report from Norm. Damien nodded in accord. "Then I will fully implement the marriage contract with Candace and sue everyone involved." Damien laughed while Mel frowned. "Thomas?" She spoke, leaning forward. "I understand that you must do these things, but how about you personally? You mentioned you had money. So, if this group of people betrayed you, it's likely that your money was involved. But given what I've heard, your position is far worse than my ex-husband's. You have been betrayed by everyone. I've been suffering with feelings of inadequacy for quite some time, and based on what you've told me, I'm confident things will get much worse for you." She paused for a time and gazed at me, her eyes gentle and sympathetic. "I apologize if it has not yet reached you. She told me it took me several weeks, but you'll need support, help, and a psychiatrist," Mel informed me without holding back. I shrugged. "I suppose," I replied, turning back to stare at the metropolis. "I am serious, Thomas," she said. "If you will let me, Damien and I would like to accompany you. Damien's a shark at work." I smiled, still looking about the city, but I can tell you that he's pretty particular about who we interact with. My spouse thinks highly of you, as seen by your presence here with us this morning. I turned to face the couple, surprise written all over my face. Damien reddened gently and shrugged. "I don't make friends easily," he explained. "You, like me, are a man of means. Understand your business and don't put up with crap." He stared at his wife. "When you told me your experience, I remembered what Mel had gone through and determined that we could at least be an umbrella for him. I was touched. I never imagined this guy could have a softer side, or that a lawyer would care." We spent the following few hours talking openly about my position. Mel continued highlighting the emotional impact, and by the time I left to check into a different hotel in another area of town, I had become considerably more upset about what I was going through. However, I recognized for the first time that I had support. I spoke with Candace for a few minutes when she called later that evening. She resumed speaking with me normally, as if nothing had happened. When I received the report from Norm at this time, I was able to time match her phone call to the footage of her with Randy. Damien encouraged me to continue attending to the office and acting normally until he had completed as many legal documents as possible. I tried, but I believe everyone noticed something was amiss. Iona probably arrived late Tuesday morning and sat at my desk. She stared at me. "Thomas, you look dreadful. So you discovered that something happened?" she inquired, questioningly but quietly, trying not to speak too loudly. I nodded slowly. "Your mood suggests that things are far worse than we discussed." She spoke as if she expected it. I nodded again. I leaned back in my chair, hoping not to snap. "I apologize, Thomas. I actually am." She spoke sympathetically. "I apologize. I am the one who told you I am ashamed." Her German accent made the word ashamed sound far more mournful than her Australian accent. I looked at her again. "Do not be," I told her, feeling my resolve strengthen to fight my way out of the situation. I watched her try to understand my pain. "If it weren't for you, I'd still be an ignorant cuckold facing an unknown future." "What's a cuckold?" she asked. I found a simple definition on Wikipedia and saw her eyes widened with shock and then soften with sympathy. Then, in low tones, I gave her a summary of what I had learned, being careful not to describe in too much detail the sordid scenes I had seen without even listening to the whole. By the end of it, tears came to her eyes. It was a good thing I had an office, because if we had been sitting on the main floor, we would have been stared at even more than we were now. I wondered, not for the first time, if anyone here knew that William Zacks, the second owner of Salmon and Zacks, knew about the affair. Iona asked if she and I would meet her for dinner that night because she wouldn't be able to keep her cool if I invited her to dinner and told her everything. I agreed, and we hit the road a few hours after work. She had 4 days, including today, left before her paid internship ended, so she wanted to leave. Well, I will admit that later that afternoon, our office manager, Mary, looked at me strangely as I passed her in the hallway. After lunch, she conferred with William for several hours, and I pretended to work the rest of the day. I looked at both men. I had talked to Damien, who had become my new lawyer and new friend, several times this week. I'd even talked to Mel a couple of times. I quickly began to trust this man. Of course, Damien is part of the inner circle. I told my private investigator, "What's going on? What have you heard that makes this worse than what we've seen so far?" Norm looked me straight in the face as he uttered the next phrase that had nearly knocked me out of the loop in a week of confusion. "They're talking about being able to kill you in about 3 years. "What?" Damien and I said at the same time. Norm nodded. "Not right away. However, twice now we've overheard the group talking about taking you out in a couple of years and dividing your trust among the 5 of them." I sat there stunned, then looked at my investigator. "How they don't have a method yet," Norm told us as if he was breaking the news. "But they've been talking about an accident which they don't like very much. They're leaning toward the possibility that your wife slowly poisoned you by putting something in your food." Stunned was the wrong word. Shocked was closer to the truth. The only good news is that they're talking in the future tense. They don't have an actual plan yet, but apparently they talk about it every time. Your friend Roger is apparently a chemist. I nodded my head, and he said he can make a compound that will slowly kill you. Sorry guys, but I couldn't finish. Both men nodded in agreement. Your wife, for her part, seems somewhat reluctant. I certainly believe that she cares for you, but she seems willing to go out of her way to get some of your money directly. But why? I whined more than I wanted to. We're married, and if the money belonged to me, it would belong to us. Why is she trying to do this? She knows I would never limit it. Norm shrugged. People do stupid things when it comes to money. Look, the main thing is that they haven't done anything yet. I believe they want your wife to have the baby and are waiting until you have full access to the trust to smooth things over. My team is still in place, Norm told us. They are still, and frankly, they are as concerned as you are probably feeling right now. All three of them sought counseling after this assignment, and they are all seasoned professionals. We discussed a few more details, and Norm pulled out a USB drive for Damien and me with other videos, photos, and audio recordings. Damien told me that next week he would prepare all the necessary paperwork, including the divorce papers, using a copy of the prenuptial agreement. Next week I will sue Simon and Zach's Candace's place of employment and every cheater. He even talked to a real estate agent who wasn't averse to selling the condo. He believed that once I gave the okay, the condo could be sold very quickly after their plans to kill me in the future became known. Damien also mentioned that he would talk to the police about a plot to commit murder. He prepared a restraining orders for each of them that they were to stay as far away from me as possible. Later that evening, I had dinner with Joanna and told her pretty much everything. She was appalled at the way I was being treated and asked what I was going to do. I tried to keep quiet, but she also knew me well enough to realize that I wouldn't tolerate Candace or the other for treating me so badly. The next few days went by as normal. Well, as normal as is even possible when your life is turned inside out. I worked 8, seemed to sleep, and every night I changed the lodge I was staying at. Now I was getting a little paranoid that someone might know where I was lying. Norm called me Thursday afternoon and asked me to meet him in the evening. When I arrived, I was surprised to find Damien already there, a grim expression frozen on his face as the three of us sat down at the table, and I looked at the two men. My heart dropped. "Is it really that bad?" I asked, trying to be cheerful, but my heart was out of place. Norm nodded. "I invited Damien here because it became known that you weren't doing a good job. It got to your boss and he talked to your wife. Our team managed to get some audio recordings using a special microphone." My heart clenched thinking back. Over the last few days, I realized that both William and Mary had been aware of what was going on and talking to George to some degree. If I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. Norm cleared his throat and brought my attention back to the current moment. "I'm sorry, but this is worse than anything you've seen so far." "You mean my wife having fun with my boss, her boss, my lawyer, my friend, and at least a few other people at my workplace? And that's worse?" I asked with a note of contempt in my voice. Norm didn't take it personally. He nodded. "Unfortunately," he began, but stopped. "I invited Damien here today because he is acting as your new attorney. So far, I've only shared snippets with him as he set things up. But given what today's report showed, I think he should be aware of our next steps." In the end, I settled on a plan that would keep them in the dark as long as possible, giving me enough time to get out of the first trouble. True, it meant I'd have to hold out on work for the rest of the week. After that, however, all hell would break loose, and I would never set foot in that place again. We spent some more time planning, and during our conversation, I even got a call from Candace. I sent the phone to voicemail saying I'd call her back later to keep up appearances. The next day, we threw a farewell party at work for Iona. She had successfully completed her internship and was looking forward to her next step. North over cake and coffee. She quietly asked how I was feeling, and I shook my head. She asked if we could meet for a drink after work, and I smiled. The rest of the day, I trained hard and managed to get some work done by the end of the day. I got a few smiles from William and Mary as I turned in my work and seemed to be back on track. That evening, over drinks without revealing details, I told Iona that things were getting worse and that it was a good thing she wouldn't be working at Simon and Zach's for long. She understood the hidden meaning. And while we were talking, I got a call from Mel. "Hey Thomas, how's it going?" she asked with concern in her voice. "On second thought, I'm fine," I told her, while Iona looked at me perplexed as to who I was talking to. "I have a plan, and your husband is frothing at the mouth waiting for it to start." Mel's laughter could be heard on the other end of the line, and Iona looked at me perplexed. "Listen, I was calling about Damien and I planning to go penguin watching tomorrow near Phillip Island, and I was wondering if you wanted to come with us. Before you say no, I want to tell you that you should go because you need to get out in nature and be with friends who can help you get through this." I smiled and then looked at Jonah, who was waiting patiently for me, Sure, Mel. Do you mind if I bring a friend with me? I asked. Iona looked at me. I heard Mel laugh. Sure, what's her name? You could hear the mirth in her voice. Iona. She's the one who brought me up to speed. We talked for another minute and agreed on a time and place to meet. When I hung up, Iona continued to look at me questioningly. Did you just ask me out by proxy, by calling another woman? She asked. When she said it, I think she saw the panic on my face. Her face changed and she laughed. Relax, Thomas, Iona told me, putting her hand on my arm. I realize you need friends right now. Where are we going? And have I heard the word penguins? The next morning at 7:30, Jonah and I met Damien, Mel, and Colleen at a gas station outside of town. I was surprised when they showed up in a canary yellow 2019 Mustang. I heard the sound of the big V8 before I even saw it and was impressed, then surprised when it pulled up next to my own 2020 V8 Mach 1 Gray. I knew I liked you for a reason. I smiled as I greeted Damien. Mel and Jonah smiled as Damien and I spent the next few minutes talking about Mustangs until we realized we hadn't introduced the ladies to each other. Excuse me, Damien, Mel, Colleen, this is Iona, Jonah, this is Damien, Melancholy. Damien is my new attorney. They shook hands. Mel hugged Jonah, and we hit the road. Have you ever wondered what could sound better than a big block V8 coming off the highway? Well, that's two big blocks heading in the same direction and having a great time. By the time we got to Phillip Island, I was smiling the full width of my face. Damien was a cocky racer, and his self-taught lawyer wanted to play, so we did. Joanna, for her part, was having a lot of fun, too. We chatted along the way, belting out the lyrics to the song Black Betty, remade by Spiderbait. Throughout the day, we had a great time with the penguins. We've all visited them before. But let's face it, penguins are cute whenever you see them. We had a great lunch of fish and chips sitting on the rocks, and it made me feel good to know that I had friends who had my back. It also surprised me that towards the end of the day, Joanna took my hand in hers. It felt natural, like it was meant to be. I must have blushed a few times when she looked at me. I was still married, and even though my wife was betraying me, I told myself I was still married. And fidelity meant a lot to me. About half an hour before we headed back, Colleen talked Joanna and Damien into walking with her to the penguins, and I could smell the setup as Melanie walked behind them. She likes you, you know, she said as we walked behind the other three. I nodded. I know I kind of like her too, but Mel put her hand on my arm as we walked. I know Thomas. She knows too. Jonah and I talked about it earlier. She was originally going to go to Queensland for a month before looking for her next job, but she said she wanted to wait so she could be there for the next month. She doesn't have a lot of savings, but she wants to be there for you. I think the surprise was reflected on my face, and at that moment Iona turned around and smiled at me. She froze when she realized what we were talking about, then smiled even wider when I smiled back and returned her attention to Colleen as we approached the penguins. Mel laughed. See, the ride home was almost as much fun as the descent, only a little more subdued. At one point, I spotted a tavern up ahead on the Waze map and called Damien to tell him that Jonah and I would be stopping for a while. Mel struck up a conversation telling us to have a good time, and Damien, Colleen, and Mel thanked us for coming and spending the day with them. I was surprised that the conversation with Jonah was light and casual during our return trip, and as we parked and walked to the tavern, it was an early summer evening. Dusk had been on for quite some time, and we took a seat by the window and perused the menu. We ordered drinks and food. I was going to indulge in a full portion of bourbon ribs, and Iona ordered the chicken parm again for those wondering, that's Parmigiana, only scaled up with more cheese, chips, and gravy. I felt the mood turn serious for a moment. Thomas came the question. I gazed at her. I had already mentioned some of the general physical traits of this woman who is now saving my life, but to elaborate. Iona was a native of Germany and had been raised in that country until she was 4 years old and her parents immigrated to Australia. She was a born lover of numbers and is now in graduate school, interning in different parts of the country to see Australia before finding a place to settle down. Physically, Iona is quite small at just 5 feet 2 inches. I can guess what you and Mel have been talking about. I know you're going through a difficult situation and you need a friend more than anything. She took a hesitant breath. That's what I want to be for you right now. A friend, first and foremost. She paused for a moment and looked away, still holding my hands. But we've known each other for a while now and over the last couple of weeks. As we've gotten closer, I've realized it could be more than that, I think. No, I know. I like you more than a friend. Do you know what I'm talking about? I smiled. I was touched. This woman was letting me know that she was interested in more than just friendship, even knowing that there was nothing wrong with my head. Iona, I started to say, but stopped myself. Her face lowered, more like crushed when I stopped. I think she thought it was a rejection. I squeezed her hands. Iona, you're an amazing woman, and you're correct. I need friends first and foremost right now. But to be honest with you, in the confusion I'm feeling right now, I kind of like you too. I left the rest of this without comment. More often than not, we go from happiness to despair in an instant. And it's much easier to make your world crumble from under your feet than it is to climb up the mountain to the sunlight. But Jonah managed it. One moment I saw her thinking about rejection. The next moment there was an expression of serene joy on her face. Her smile was up to her ears, and her big blue eyes looked at me with adoration. We spent the rest of the evening talking about likes and dislikes. We talked about movies, music, and of course, Mustangs. I told her the story of losing my parents and grandparents, and her eyes widened when I confided in her about my trust fund. "So why are you working at Salmon & Zach's?" she asked shortly after my story. I shrugged. I had originally planned to work there for a couple of years just for the experience. I explained. I thought about working there for a while like you did to see different things. And I talked to my dad about starting an investment company in a few years. But when they died, I just stayed there. The mention of my parents' deaths in relation to my trust sobered us up a bit. Sorry, Thomas. When I look at you, I don't see some rich, spoiled guy. I see a man who is focused but has no tolerance for fools, even if he has his own humility. I snorted. Thanks. I'm serious. You're a good man, she lectured me. You haven't lost your temper yet, and you haven't gone and killed them yet, referring to my wife and her lovers. No, not like they're going to do to me, I replied dejectedly, without thinking what she said. Widening her eyes, I realized what I'd said and proceeded to retell Jonah the high-level conversation my private investigator had picked up on, that they were all planning on blowing me off in a few years to get some of the money. After I became the father of Candace's baby, Iona was shocked, and by the end of the conversation, she was crying. You're doing something about this, aren't you? I'm not a lawyer. This has to be a crime, she almost whispered. Her fingers squeezed my hand. She was worried, and I almost thought she was going to start looking for the killers. I nodded. Damien is on the case. It'll all happen at the end of next week. She let me go. I'm sorry, but Thomas, your wife is plotting to kill you, she said with an almost hysterical note in her voice. We talked for a few more minutes, and as we walked back to my car, she held my hand, looking around almost constantly. It's okay, Iona, I said, holding her hand in mine. I doubt anyone is watching us, but if they are, I have a fast car and we can outrun them. That made her laugh, and the rest of the way home our conversation was much more subdued. When I dropped her off, Iona hugged me tightly, and in a moment of weakness, I kissed her chastely on the lips. We both blushed and smiled, realizing what we had just done and realizing that there would be more to our relationship if we allowed it. As we drove away, I smiled. On the way to the new bed and breakfast I was staying at, I sang along to the radio and felt the ache in my heart begin to subside, thanks to Damien, Mel, and Colleen, but mostly thanks to Jonah. I was already a couple of streets away from home when the phone rang. It was Candace. I could hear her at the bar. Baby, she said with a note of concern in her voice. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you all day. Damn, I thought I haven't returned her call. Sorry, Candace, but I went to Phillip Island today with some friends and their daughter to see the penguins. It was last minute and I got a little distracted. I felt the tension in her voice. Ease. Okay. I was a little worried. Did you have a good day? She asked. Now the issue of my lack of communication was resolved. It was a great day. Seeing the penguins with the kids was amazing, I said, letting genuine sense of joy. I felt watching Colleen with the penguins flow through our conversation. They make you look at the happiness you experience in a different way. I wasn't lying. Watching Colleen with the penguins was hilarious. She loved feeding them the bait fish we bought, and at one point made us all laugh when a group of penguins followed her around looking for more food. You know, maybe we can start trying for a baby of our own when I get back. You're giving me nothing but trouble. That's right, I thought. Have a baby so you can poison me later. See you later, Candace. How's the conference going? Did you go? I asked, changing the subject. Yeah, the conference went great. We really did a lot of studying, she said, not realizing that I had picked up on the hints she was using. And yes, a group of us, including my boss, are going out for a few drinks. Do not worry. My boss is keeping an eye on me to make sure no outsiders trespass on my virtue. You bet, I thought. As if this whore had any virtue at all. After that, I lost interest in the conversation and let her talk to me for a few minutes about, well, I have no idea what she was talking about. I wasn't listening anymore. She hung up with the words, I love you, but I don't know if she noticed that I never reciprocated. For the next week, I came to work early every day to get all the work done in time. Given what was coming up, I didn't want to leave any of my clients without work. I was sure that both Mary and William were up to something with George and Candace, but I didn't know what. And as the week went on, I noticed that they were looking at me less and less often as I turned up my nose. I moved to another hotel. Why? Well, against all odds, I was paranoid before I found out about the plot to end my life. After that, I was just as freaked out by the whole situation as Jonah was, so I switched locations every other day. I spent most evenings that week with Jonah. We would have dinner and she would help me pack up all of mine, and Candace's things in my apartment. My stuff was going to the storage shed of the company I had invested in years ago and for free. Candace, this stuff was being moved out and placed elsewhere with payment for 60 days, giving her a couple of months to sort out her upcoming affairs. I talked to Candace every day and got Norm's reports. One night, as we were packing up the kitchen, I mistakenly showed Jonah a couple of pictures from the report, and she immediately ran to the bathroom and threw up. When she came back, she was furious and kept hugging me, berating my soon-to-be ex-wife for her behavior. Monday morning came. It was game day. The cheaters were due back early in the morning, and I was going to be away for a month in Cairns in North Queensland. I went to work that morning like a normal day. I attended a staff meeting where William informed us that George would be back tomorrow for the first time since I had been inducted. I noticed Mary looking at me while William was telling us this. I made a note to pass this on to Damien for conspiracy charges if they were involved in anything. Shortly before lunch, one of the group asked me if I wanted to have lunch with them, and I politely declined. However, when they left, I started in a race on my laptop and walked out, leaving my keys and cards on my desk. I wanted to leave a letter of resignation, but Damien's team was supposed to deliver it this afternoon. As I was leaving the office, the driver of the company car opened the door, greeting me. We drove to the airport, and he informed me that our plane would be on time while Iona hugged me, giving me another of those chaste kisses I had grown to love. When we got to the airport, Damien and Mel were there to see us off. I handed my phone to the lawyer, and he in turn handed me a new phone with a new number on it. Only a few people knew this number, and it would remain that way for some time to come. Iona and I flew business class to Cairns, enjoying champagne as soon as we reached cruising level. I knew that Candace, as well as the other rogues, would be arriving home around this time as we disembarked from the plane. We were met by another driver who took Jonah and I to the nice bed and breakfast we had booked for the first week of our stay. I'm partial to Bambi's, and I have to say this one was lovely. It was run by an elderly gay couple who had been together for 40 years. They built this split-level house when prices were cheap, and they had a house full of foster children. Now they ran a bed and breakfast for entertainment and company. They gave us a full breakfast in the morning with bacon, eggs, tomatoes, toast, beans, and spinach. The coffee was not as good as at home from a pod, but acceptable. But the view? The house had a gorgeous view of the water at sunset. We loved watching the play of colors in the little cove as the waves gently lapped the walkway leading across the street to the esplanade. Jonah and Iona and I had a large double bed and our own attached bathroom with a double shower and whirlpool tub. The owners told us that they had remodeled a few years ago and now have 2 king bedrooms and 4 superior rooms. The king bedrooms were luxurious and cost a little more, but I knew it was worth it. On the way from the airport to the hotel, I turned on my phone and got a single text from Damien. "It's done. Chaos ensued. But you're a free man now. Turn off your phone and I'll talk to you in a few days. I did. Is told. And that night, after registering for the first time, I got nervous. Jonah and I knew we were going to end up in the same bed. And I think we were worried because of our expectations of each other. Neither of us needed to worry. We went to the bedroom, and after that, we all fell asleep. "Good morning, how are you feeling?" she asked, noticing that I was awake. "Awesome. Last night was." "Wow. Seriously, Jonah, it was incredible," she squealed in praise. "So it worked?" She nodded approvingly. "What worked?" I asked, perplexed. "You forgot about the bitch and you claimed me as yours. And now I'm yours, Thomas. As long as you have me, my heart and soul are yours." We dressed and went to breakfast, walking slowly at first while Jonah got used to the slight soreness. Our hosts wished us good morning and gave us knowing looks. The next few days were amazing. Jonah and I enjoyed the cuisine. We visited the amazing Daintree rainforest and even took a steam train and cable car ride. We snorkel on a large barrier reef by the end of the first week. I had forgotten my cell phone. It wasn't until Damien and Mel showed up with Colleen that I remembered it. We had agreed beforehand that for the second week they would stay in the same place as us. Damien grinned and said that was fine. That night at dinner, he had a story to tell. "Well, the scraps must have hit the rotating device," he said, when Colleen went to her room to watch a movie so the adults could talk. He leaned in. "A total of 9 people have been arrested in the last week on charges of conspiracy to commit murder." What Jonah and I said at the same time? Damien grinned. "Yes," he said, and a lawyerly grin spread across his face from the statements we've been able to get on your behalf and the interviews we've gotten from the police over the last week. 5 of the people you know, including your former boss and your soon-to-be ex-wife, the office manager at your former place of employment, the other owner, and 2 others at Candace's work have been involved. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. 9 people wanted me dead? I asked. Sort of, Damien said. They all admitted to having nothing specific against you. Indeed, according to them, you were a very nice guy. But they had an agreement that each of them would receive at least a couple $1,000,000 from your trust, a few years after your death. Of course, they all blamed each other. Well, except Candace. She broke down when she came home and found you. Gone. And the pictures in divorce papers say so. She is now being held in a secure wing of the local Ramsey Hospital for observation. I delivered your resignation letter and noticed that you are personally suing your former place of employment, he told me, smiling at the memory. Now they're closed for business, and all employees are terminated immediately. Of course, no one thinks they'll survive. It's a similar situation at Candace's workplace, and I was also present when the notices were served and watched the arrest of Mr. Randwick Johnston. I have to say it was very satisfying from a professional standpoint. I wasn't charged for it. He winked at me and I laughed. What about Roger? I asked. He got arrested too. His wife thought he was traveling for work, not having fun with one of his friend's wives. I called her and asked if we could represent her pro bono. It seemed like the least I could do. Mel slapped Damien's face. Kid, stop teasing. We all laughed and spent the next hour prying for details. At one point, Mel looked at Jonah and I holding hands and commented, "Well, that didn't take you to very long, did it?" she stated. Iona just looked at me and blushed, then at Damien, and then Mel laughed. I made him take me in his arms, the first night she told the couple in front of us. Then I made sure he never left the room. I don't think he had one free minute to think about those idiots. Besides, I think he likes it when I walk funny the next day. Damien exhaled his coffee through his nose and Mel laughed. I, on the other hand, just smiled like the Cheshire Cat. Mel looked at me. I think you'll be fine, Thomas, she said, looking between Jonah and me. And this one I know is a keeper. They stayed with us for the next week and we enjoyed day trips around the world. Overnight stays at casinos and even a light airplane flight to the Daintree coast. At the end of the week, they headed home to Melbourne and we boarded a plane to Brisbane. In Brisbane, Iona introduced me to her parents as her boyfriend, and I happily played the part back in a major metropolitan city. We were on the news one night where they were talking about a plot to destroy the future. My name wasn't mentioned, but when Jonah told my parents it was me, they almost panicked until we told them the story. More honest and trustworthy people I had never met as we went through our journey with them. We spent another week sightseeing in Brisbane and then another week in Sydney. By the time a month had passed, Neither Jonah nor I could imagine ourselves without each other. Toward the end of the trip, we started talking about marriage and children. I told her that once I was divorced, we would get engaged. It wasn't a traditional proposal, but she loved me anyway, knowing that when the time came, I would get down on one knee in front of her. When the subject of children came up, she blushed. "Thomas, I have a confession to make," she said. "I might be pregnant," she said, shyly, trying to gauge my reaction. She exhaled. "I'm supposed to get my period in a few days, and then we'll all know." She looked at me, hopefully again. "Are you crazy?" I snorted. "No, I've thought about it a few times," I admitted. "Honestly, I was hoping we'd accidentally get pregnant. For the past month. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have a baby with than you." Unfortunately, she woke up in the morning with her period. I kissed her with an unhappy look and told her maybe next month. In the meantime, we need to practice a lot. Eventually, we finished our vacation and headed back to Melbourne. We stayed overnight at Iona's house. She managed to persuade the landlord to keep her apartment for a few more months instead of going north. It was a small apartment a half-hour outside of town. After staying at all the bed and breakfast around the country for the past month, Iona was a little embarrassed about her accommodations. I showed her away and spent the next half hour walking around the apartment, asking the most inane questions about everything in the world. By the end of it, she was already giggling and coming up with ostentatious answers. The next day, we went to Damien's office. Jonah and I worked there looking at new places to live. During lunch, Mel brought us both coffee. "Mel, what are you doing here?" Iona asked. Asked Iona. "A little birdie told me you were here, so I thought I'd come by to see how you were doing and bring you some coffee. Freshly made, of course." She set them on the table and took a sip of her coffee when Iona sighed. "What is wrong?" Iona asked Mitchell, catching the concern in her sigh. Iona shrugged his shoulders. "It's not all that good, Mel. He hasn't knocked me up yet." A few moments later, Mel was already splashing coffee on the conference room table. "Excuse me," I laughed. "Jonah and I are going to try to have a baby. After the past month, we just decided to see what happens." "That's quick," Mel said, perhaps a little concerned. We both nodded to our friend. "Maybe," Iona said dismissively. "There's no one in this world I'd rather have a baby with," she said, looking at me adoringly. Mel looked between us, studying us with her gaze, and suddenly shrugged. Then she asked what we were doing at the office. As soon as she found out we were looking for a house, she immediately agreed. She spent the next couple of hours working with us, helping us determine our wants and needs, where we would live and what we might need if we were going to have a baby. At one point, Damien stopped by on his way to court and smiled at me as he heard the two women talking in the kitchen. Over the next month, we looked at several places and eventually settled on 3 apartments and a house. Iona relented, saying it was my money, and she would be happy to have me by her side. I replied that it would be our place, and we would choose it together. We ended up choosing a penthouse apartment in a slightly older building at the bottom of Collins Street. It was fairly easy to get 2 major highways from here. Public transportation was fast and like everywhere else in Melbourne. It was a short walk to any food. The apartment itself was gorgeous. It had 3 modest bedrooms and a large master bedroom. It had a great view of Melbourne where the tennis matches and the Australian Open were held. The building had a pool, sauna and gym, and a 24-hour concierge. We had 2 garage spaces and I was able to park my Mustang in the new Jeep that Ione bought. All in all, it was like an enlarged hotel that we could call home. There wasn't much furniture in the house, but it was worth spending an afternoon with Mel. And everything changed. Within a month, we had moved in, which was a good thing. Since Jonah's period. Never came that month. Now it's been almost 9 months since it started. Jonah is now 6 months old and we have our baby boy. We've settled into the apartment and it seems like every surface has soft baby-proofing on it. We've turned one of the rooms into a nursery, another into a bedroom for guests, and a third into an office for work. As for work, Jonah and I have started a new investment business. At the moment, we only have a couple million, as I'm still a couple of years away from getting a trust. But Iona is good with numbers and she has a good head on her shoulders. She owns 10% of the stock in the new venture. She said she didn't want anything, but I managed to convince Mel. To be honest, that's the only fight we've had so far. I now own 70%. We have an investor with 15%, and the last 5% is owned by Damien and Mel. They have become very close friends, and it never ceases to amaze me the difference between Damien the lawyer and Damien the friend. As a lawyer on my side, he was such a force that you had to get out of his way or be destroyed. He managed to get judgments against Candace's and my former places of employment. Both companies were now in administration, but they had a lot of liquid assets when everything happened. So he said both Jonah and I would receive substantial amounts in checks. He also secured a win for Roger's wife, where almost all of the assets went to her as he was now in prison for the next 30 years, as were almost everyone else involved in the plot to kill me. I received one message from William and George asking for mercy, which I immediately tore up in front of Damien when he showed me the pearly whites. And finally, he took great pleasure in cutting my former lawyer to pieces on the stand during the trial. I hadn't mentioned Candace too much so far, but not because she was getting away with it. In fact, she got 35 years without parole. The only people in court who sympathized with her when her sentence was announced were her parents. However, after learning what she had done and what she planned to do, I don't think their support was much even then. The judge immediately granted a divorce based on the offenses against me. He noted his disgust at their behavior and the fact that they had ruined so many lives. According to the prenuptial agreement, Candace left with her belongings and $15,000 to start her life over. I put that money in a trust fund with a percentage of the income she would receive upon her release from prison due to her mental illness. She did not attend the court hearing. She was still in the secure psychiatric unit and was to be transferred to the medical unit of a medium security prison. Within a month of sentencing, her only request was that I come to visit her once she was settled. I agreed, citing that it would not interfere with the divorce. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in a secure meeting room in the medical wing of the prison where Candace was being held. The room was simple, a bolted table, chairs with chains, one of those one-way mirrors they always show in movies. I'd been sitting there for about 10 minutes when the doctor and the guard brought my ex-wife in. She looked like 6 kinds of hell. Her normally straight brown hair was loose all over. It looked like she had tried to comb it in some places, but not others. Next were the eyes. They were shifting to the sides as if she was looking for something. It didn't look like she was threatened by anything, but it looked like she was looking for a threat. When she saw me, it was as if she focused and an eerie calm came over her. The doctor frowned, but retreated to a corner. The third and most obvious thing was that my ex-wife was very, very pregnant. I looked at her belly as she sat up and Candace smiled. "I'm actually almost a week late, Thomas," she told me, running her hands over her swollen belly. "They told me that if I don't go into labor within 24 hours, they're going to have to induce labor for me. Is that normal, Thomas? Our baby." "Candace." I caught the doctor's wave and stopped. "It's okay, Candace," I told her. "Have them paid you so you can have the baby." She seemed to relax. "Thomas, I want you to know that I never wanted to see you dead. I didn't care about your money, but they all convinced me." Candace told me sadly. "They told me that after we had the baby, it would be the right time. I didn't want to do anything to you. But they said that if I didn't do it, they'd do it anyway. But it would be much more cruel and I would be left with nothing. Thomas, my love, you have to believe me." She stopped and waited. I looked at the doctor and he shrugged. "Candace," I started to say. "It's okay, Thomas," she said, interrupting me, and smiled sadly, looking into my eyes for a moment before looking away again. "I know we're divorced, I realize that. But when our baby is born, I'm sure they'll let me out, and I'll make things right. All those things I did, honey, they meant nothing to me. You should know that I love only you. When Roger took me the first time, I felt so guilty," Candace said in a whisper as if it were a secret. "But when George found out, and then my job. Then Randy Thomas," she raised her pleading eyes to me again. "Can you forgive me?" I halted. "Candace," she started again, interrupting me. "It's okay, Thomas, our baby will help you. Forgive me. We have this baby and I will come out. Then we can be a family. I promise I won't let them kill you again." She began to ramble incoherently. "I love you, Thomas. You're my #1 boyfriend. All of them are #2. I mean, they were good, but they were just as interested in each other as they were in me. I think they only had fun with me for the money. Thomas, it's just going to be you and me here, and of course our baby for the next 15. She rambled on about our baby, about us being together again, about her coming out and us being a family. At one point she stopped and the doctor and I looked at each other and then we heard a sob. "I know I screwed up, Thomas," she said quietly, a note of sanity and reservation in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I know this baby isn't yours, and you and I will never." She shuddered with sobs. "The drugs they give me calm me down, make me think it's possible. But in between their effects and when they're weathered, I have moments where I remember what a slut I was." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Her reflected the pain in her eyes. "I betrayed everyone. I became a whore out of greed when you offered me all of this. Anyway, I betrayed you often, and then I was going to poison you. I'm a low, dirty whore who deserves revenge." She was beginning to worry. "I know you hate me, Thomas, and I am cursed for still loving you as much as the day I betrayed you." She stood up and in one motion pulled off her prison top and maternity bra, leaving her topless, the doctor to cautiously approach her. Candace grabbed her stomach. "Get back at Thomas," she growled, addressing herself rather than me. "Hit me and make me cry. Hurt me and make me feel the pain you feel. This baby is not yours. I gave this body away when it didn't belong to me." She collapsed to the ground and sobbed. "I didn't know what to do and just sat next to her. It was supposed to be yours, Thomas. It was supposed to," she repeated, sitting on the ground. Slowly, Candace looked at me and then at the doctor. The doctor, sensing that things were coming to an end, gently turned to my ex-wife. "I think it's time for us to eat dinner and for you to take your next round of medication, don't you, Candace?" The doctor helped her into her outer garments, and as she knocked the door and the guard outside took her away, Candace took one last look at me, a sad smile on her face. "Live well, Thomas." And with that, she left. A week later, I got a call from her doctor, thanking me for seeing her. She told me that everything had gone better than he expected, and Candace had given birth to a baby girl. The baby was healthy, and DNA testing was now being done on the father. Candace advised them to put the baby up for adoption so that the girl would grow up in a loving family, rather than going through the foster care system in hopes of one day being close to her, which she knew would not happen. That night, after meeting Candace, I was all of breath until Jonah laid my head on her stomach, and I felt our son kicking. 2 months later, John Thomas, the other, was born. I thought of the innocent little girl, and in a moment of weakness, I asked Damien to contact the adoption agency and inquire about the possibility of adopting baby Candace. 2 more months passed, and little Macy, Candace Drew, moved in with us. We learned that she was Randy's child, and Damien happily sued the disgraced attorney for child support again. In the end, a paltry sum was allocated her university fund. Of course, she would never need them, but it was a basic sum. Jonah, for her part, never treated Candace's daughter any differently than she treated her own children. We both believed that a child should not suffer the sins of their biological parents. Jonah and I married a year later when the kids were walking, and then on our honeymoon, we gave them a baby sister. A year and a half later, a baby brother came along, and then Iona convinced me to have surgery. When Macy turned 18, we told her the truth about her origins, about our history with her birth parents, and that no matter what, we loved her. There were turbulent emotions in the apartment that week, and only talking to Aunt Mel calmed her down and made her realize that Jonah and I would always be her parents. Anyway, we made an appointment for her to meet Randy and Candace. Randy didn't care at all, but he insulted her as a mistake that shouldn't have been born, then tried to insult her as a tainted product that landed him in jail. This caused 2 guards to pull me away. My former attorney put him in the infirmary for a week and robbed him of 3 of his teeth. Macy never saw him again. Candace, on the other hand, was a different story. She had recovered enough over the years to be released to the general ward. She was still frail, but the doctors told us that several inmates kept an eye on her and kept her out of too much trouble. When Candace saw Macy standing there with Jonah and me, she realized everything and broke down, kneeling in the visitors' lounge, covering her mouth with her hand and sobbing. Macy, being a well-mannered young woman, walked over to her and helped her up, then walked with her to the table. Jonah and I stood back and watched as Macy, holding out her hand, said to Candace, "Hi, my name is Macy. Candace Other. And my mom and dad told me that you are my birth mother." We watched Candace burst into tears again. The guards were watching us, but we had warned them ahead of time that this was going to happen. And the warden allowed some hugging, but only after Candace had gone through full body search. I have to admit that even I was moved by the scene with my adopted daughter and ex-wife standing in front of me. Jonah looked up at me and wiped away a tear, exclaiming that it must be pollen. A minute later, my wife pulled me over to my ex-wife and we spent the next hour talking. Candace thanked me for adopting Macy. She had no idea what happened to her after she gave her up and didn't even know her name. The fact that I adopted her daughter changed Candace for the better, and the doctors told us that her behavior improved markedly after that. She still had a little less than half her sentence left to serve, but the prison told us that she had become a much more model prisoner since that encounter. For her part, Macy visited Candace on her birthday, and at Christmas they were never very close. But at the insistence of her mother and Aunt Mel, she traveled to see her. For my part, I grudgingly agreed. I had already begun to forgive her, but Candace knew as well as I did that we would never be friends. As far as Jonah and I were concerned, she was still the woman who made my soul sing. She once took the risk of letting me know that I was being held for a fool. She guards me jealously and is friendly to anyone. But if she sees anyone making moves toward me, she scolds him in German. Thank you for taking time to hear today's story. If you loved the story, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a tale to share regarding your own or someone else's circumstance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.